My name is Brianna Hayes, and I'm 28 years old. I never imagined that one sentence from my mother could shake the foundation of everything I thought I knew about my family. But that's exactly what happened the day she looked me in the eye. Her voice colder than winter and said, "We all decided. You're banned from Dad's party." I remember that moment as if it were frozen in time. It was a sunny Thursday afternoon in our suburban neighborhood in Oregon. My mother had invited me over to discuss plans for my father's 60th birthday, and I had shown up with ideas, decorations, and even printed photos from our childhood albums. I thought we were going to bond, maybe even laugh a little as we flipped through memories. But instead, she sat on the couch, arms crossed, and delivered that sentence like a verdict. My heart didn't just break, it cracked open, spilling years of loyalty, sacrifice, and suppressed pain all at once. It wasn't always like this. Growing up, I was the good daughter. I followed the rules, got straight A's, stayed home while my younger brother, Kyle, partied and rebelled. I took care of Dad when he had surgery. I helped Mom cook every Thanksgiving. I even turned down a job offer out of state because they said they needed me close. Kyle, on the other hand, always managed to find his way back into their good graces, no matter how badly he messed up. Somehow, I was the one who ended up on the outside. Let me know in the comments if you've ever had to walk away from people you love to protect your peace. And don't forget to like and subscribe to see how I turned their silence into my strength. Still, I kept trying to be the daughter they could be proud of. Until that day. "What do you mean, banned?" I asked, trying to keep my voice from shaking. Mom didn't flinch. "It's not just me. Your father doesn't want drama. Kyle feels it would be better. We don't want any tension that day." "Tension?" I repeated, stunned. "What tension?" She avoided my eyes. "You know what I mean. You always have something to say, always criticizing, always judging. We don't want that energy." That energy. That was how she described me. Not the person who sat by Dad's bedside for hours in the hospital. Not the one who stayed up late helping Kyle get through his DUI case quietly so it wouldn't ruin his job prospects. No, I was just energy, disruptive, unwelcome. I stared at her, waiting for some kind of punchline. A laugh, a wink, anything to tell me this was some twisted joke. But her expression never changed. Cold, final, like I was already cut out. I left the house without another word. As I drove home, my hands gripping the steering wheel like it might fly out of control, I ran through every moment I could remember. When had things started to shift? When did the ground beneath me begin to crack? The truth is, the signs were there. The birthday dinners where I wasn't invited. The family group chat I was mysteriously removed from. The phone calls that never came. It wasn't one big betrayal. It was 1,000 little ones, stacked silently over years. And I had been blind. But what made this moment different was that it was no longer subtle. It was a declaration, a choice. They had chosen to cut me out. I spent that night sitting on the floor of my apartment, surrounded by photos I had planned to bring for the party. I stared at the faces, Dad smiling with frosting on his nose, Mom in her old garden hat, Kyle as a toddler, pulling my hair, and I felt something rising inside me. Not sadness, not even grief. It was fury. How dare they erase me after everything I had done? How dare they label me the problem when I was the one who kept this family together time and time again? I realized then that this wasn't about a birthday party. This was about control. And I wasn't going to let them rewrite the story of who I was. They had disinvited me from a party, but I was about to give them a show they'd never forget. In the weeks that followed, I withdrew completely. No texts, no calls, no more chasing approval. I started revisiting memories with sharper eyes, paying attention to the things I used to ignore. I dug into family history, old messages, inconsistencies. There were secrets buried deep in the walls of our pristine home, and suddenly, I wanted to know everything. The more I uncovered, the clearer it became. This wasn't just about me not being liked. This was about me knowing too much, speaking too loudly, asking questions they didn't want answered. And now they were trying to silence me. Well, too bad. They wanted a quiet celebration, but I was about to disrupt it in the most unforgettable way. And no one, not my mother, not Kyle, not even my father, was ready for what I had planned. The days following that moment of betrayal moved like molasses, slow and heavy. I'd wake up every morning with a knot in my chest and go to sleep with clenched fists. But my anger gave me a strange kind of clarity. I began to see everything with new eyes. There were no illusions left to hold on to. My family had made their choice. Now, it was my turn. I started with Kyle. If I was going to understand why I had become the black sheep, I needed to revisit our history, not as siblings, but as people raised under the same roof with entirely different rules. Growing up, Kyle was always the center of attention. If he got a C on his report card, my parents would say, "At least he passed." If I got an A, they'd ask what went wrong. When he crashed Dad's car at 17, they blamed the rain. When I forgot to feed the dog one afternoon, they said I was irresponsible and grounded me for a week. But I didn't question it back then. I thought that was just how life worked. Some people needed more help. Some people like me were expected to handle everything alone. Now I realized it had always been favoritism. Plain, unapologetic favoritism. And I wondered what else they had hidden in their selective silence. I remembered a conversation I'd overheard between my parents once, years ago. I was coming down the stairs and stopped when I heard my name. "She's too curious," my mom had whispered. "She asks questions." "She's smart," Dad replied, though his tone lacked conviction. Smart, but inconvenient. That's what I'd always been to them. I decided to dig deeper. I wasn't sure what I was looking for at first. Maybe a pattern, maybe a reason. But I had a feeling something darker was lurking beneath their polished smiles and curated image of family unity. I started small, going through old photos, emails, text messages, anything I could find that might give me leverage or at least understanding. One afternoon, I opened an old hard drive I hadn't touched in years. It was from my college days, filled with saved documents, essays, and archived emails. I wasn't expecting anything useful until I stumbled across a folder labeled Dad's Office. It was a backup I'd made years ago when his laptop had crashed. He had asked me to retrieve a few files for work, and I had copied everything onto my drive, just in case. Inside that folder, I found financial statements. At first, I didn't think much of them, but as I scrolled through the spreadsheets, I noticed something strange. Payments made to an unknown name, recurring every month, always the same amount. The name didn't match any company or client I recognized. My curiosity piqued. I Googled the name. It was a woman. Same last name as my father's college girlfriend. A woman who, as far as I knew, had moved to another state decades ago. And she had a daughter, born a year before Kyle. My stomach flipped. I dug deeper. I found old scanned documents, letters, even a few receipts from visits out of town, and a paternity test. Dated almost 25 years ago. Positive. That's when the pieces started coming together like a slow-motion avalanche. Kyle wasn't just my brother. He was also my father's son with another woman, which meant my mother had known all along, and they had raised Kyle in our home as if nothing had happened. Not only accepted the lie, but protected it, built a life on top of it. And me? I was the reminder. The daughter who looked too closely, asked too many questions, and didn't play pretend. Suddenly, everything made sense. Why Kyle was always forgiven. Why I was punished for even the smallest mistakes. Why, when I asked about the past, my mother would shut down. Why I was the one excluded from family events. Not because I was difficult, but because I was dangerous to the illusion they worked so hard to maintain. I closed the laptop slowly, my hands trembling. It wasn't just betrayal I was feeling anymore. It was disgust. Rage. I had been lied to my entire life, gaslighted into thinking I was the problem, when all I ever did was ask for honesty. Now I had it, and I knew exactly what I was going to do with it. The party was only a week away. I knew they wouldn't expect me to show up, and I wasn't planning to crash it in the way they feared. No dramatic scene. No yelling in front of guests. That would make me look like the unstable one, and I was done letting them control the narrative. Instead, I crafted my plan with care. First, I drafted a letter, no, A confession. Not mine. Theirs. I wrote down everything I had uncovered, from the financial documents to the paternity test. I attached copies of every file, labeled neatly, chronologically, like a lawyer preparing for trial. Then I wrote a second letter, this one addressed to Kyle. In it, I asked the questions they had all avoided for years. Did he know? Did he ever wonder? Or had he simply played along, content to be protected while I was sacrificed? I printed both letters, sealed them in separate envelopes, and then I bought a gift. A beautifully wrapped box tied with a golden ribbon. Inside, I placed a single USB drive, labeled simply, The Truth. My plan was simple. The morning of the party, I would send the packages by courier. One to the house, one to Kyle's apartment. No return address, no warning. They wanted me gone. Fine. But the truth would walk in wearing my name. And once it did, there would be no party big enough to celebrate what was left of that family. The morning of my father's birthday was unnervingly quiet. Oregon had one of those overcast skies that seemed to press down on the city, thick and gray like a warning. I sat by the window, cradling a mug of coffee I wasn't drinking, and watched the delivery tracker on my phone as both packages moved steadily toward their destinations. There was no hesitation left in me, only calm, cold, calculated calm, the kind I imagined surgeons must feel right before they make the first cut. The first package was scheduled to arrive at my parents' house around 11 a.m., just before the guests would begin showing up. I wanted it to hit them before the party could build momentum, before they could put on the masks they wore so well. Kyle's package would be delivered 30 minutes later. I had arranged it that way intentionally. I wanted him to read it alone, without the safety net of our mother's explanations or my father's deflections. As I watched the confirmation messages light up my screen, something shifted inside me. For the first time in weeks, maybe years, I felt powerful, not because I wanted revenge in the way villains do in movies, but because I had finally taken control of my own story. No more being the outsider, no more silence. They had forced me into the shadows for too long. Now I had flipped on the lights. Around noon, my phone started ringing. First once, then twice. My mother, my father, even Kyle. I didn't answer. I wanted them to sit with it, to squirm, to face what they had buried. By 12:30, the texts began pouring in. From Mom, "We need to talk. Call me immediately." From Dad, "Where did you get this? We need to explain." From Kyle, "Brianna, what the hell did you do?" It was working. But what I hadn't expected, what truly startled me, was the text that came in at 1:06 p.m. from an unknown number. "Thank you for telling the truth. I've waited a long time for this." I stared at the screen, confused, until I realized the name beneath the number. Elna Clark, the woman from the financial records, the mother of Kyle. How she got my number, I didn't know. But her message hit me harder than I cared to admit. There was something strangely comforting about her words. Like someone out there had been holding their breath just as long as I had, waiting for the truth to come out. Maybe we were both exiles in different ways, and now we had found common ground in the wreckage. Later that evening, after ignoring every call and text, I turned off my phone and went for a walk. The streets were mostly empty, the wind cold against my skin. It felt right, like the world had quieted just enough to let me breathe for the first time in years. As I walked past familiar homes and tidy lawns, I thought about what might be happening at my parents' house. I imagined the party unraveling in real time. My mother pacing in the kitchen, trying to contain the storm. My father silent, distant, maybe even ashamed. Kyle reading and rereading every word I'd written, his world tilting on its axis. And the guests, cousins, neighbors, old friends, murmuring, watching the cracks form in the perfect facade. I didn't need to be there to see it. I could feel it all from miles away. But what I didn't expect was what came next. That night, just before midnight, there was a knock at my door. I froze. I hadn't told anyone where I lived, not recently. I hadn't seen my family in weeks. Part of me thought it might be Kyle, furious and ready to lash out. Another part wondered if it was Mom, desperate to claw back control. My heartbeat echoed in my ears as I crept toward the door and peeked through the peephole. It was my father, alone. He looked older than I remembered, more tired. His shoulders slumped beneath his coat, and for the first time, I didn't see the man who used to carry me on his back. I saw someone defeated. I opened the door but said nothing. He stood there for a moment, shifting uncomfortably before speaking. "I just wanted to see you," he said quietly. I crossed my arms, blocking the doorway with my body. "Why now?" He looked down at his shoes. "Because you were right, about everything." The admission didn't bring me joy. It didn't feel like victory. It felt empty, like something we should have said to each other years ago, when it still mattered. "I'm not here to apologize," he added. "At least not yet. I don't think you'd believe me if I did." "Then why are you here?" I asked. He looked up, and for the first time, I saw real sorrow in his eyes. "Because I need you to understand that it wasn't your fault. We made choices, bad ones. We lied, we covered, we tried to keep things tidy, but it all came at your expense. And I see that now." My throat tightened. I didn't want his pity. I wanted his truth. "And Kyle?" I asked. He sighed. He's angry, confused. He didn't know until today, and he doesn't know how to process it. So he lashes out. He nodded. He's not proud of who he is right now, but that's on us, not him. I let that hang in the air, a silence that carried decades of pain between us. "I'm not coming back," I finally said. "Even if you all come clean, even if the truth is out, I don't belong in that house anymore." He nodded again, slower this time. "I know. I just thought you deserved to hear it from me." I stepped aside slightly, gesturing for him to leave. "Then you've said it." He didn't argue. He just walked back down the steps, into the night, his figure swallowed by the dark. I closed the door, locked it, and leaned against it, breathing out everything I had been holding in since the moment Mom told me I was banned. I wasn't broken. I wasn't bitter. I was done. After that night, something changed in me. It wasn't sudden or cinematic. It was quiet, like when the last ember of a fire fades into cold ash. I didn't feel triumphant or relieved. I just felt still. It was as if the years of noise, the justifications, the guilt, the constant push to be seen and understood, had finally gone silent. I had spent so long chasing their approval, trying to fit into a family that only valued me when I was invisible, that I hadn't realized how much of myself I had given up in the process. But now, there was space. Not just in my calendar or my apartment, but in my mind, in my soul. I stopped checking my phone for their messages. I stopped wondering what they were saying about me behind closed doors. It didn't matter anymore. For the first time, I wasn't orbiting their needs or expectations. I was standing on my own, on solid ground, with my name and my voice intact. Still, healing wasn't as simple as cutting ties. It never is. In the weeks that followed, I found myself revisiting old wounds I had never properly addressed, like the way my mother used to compliment my appearance only when I wore makeup, subtly implying I wasn't enough on my own, or the time Kyle borrowed money from me, $2,000 I had saved from tutoring, promising to pay it back, but never did. I never told my parents because I knew they'd just say, "He's your brother," as if that excused everything. I remembered the nights I cried quietly in my bedroom as a teenager, the door closed, the walls thin, and how no one ever knocked to ask if I was okay. These weren't just memories. They were echoes of neglect dressed up as tradition. They were proof that I had been gaslit into believing I was difficult, too emotional, too sharp. But now, I saw it for what it was: survival. I started going to therapy again. Not because I was broken, but because I was rebuilding. And sometimes you need help lifting the heavier pieces. My therapist, Carla, was the first person in a long time who didn't flinch when I spoke my truth out loud. She didn't try to soften it, didn't try to spin it into something palatable. She listened, and in her silence, I found clarity. "Brianna," she said during one session, "you're not grieving a family. You're grieving the idea of one." That sentence hit like a blow to the chest. She was right. What I missed wasn't them. It was the hope that someday they'd love me the way I needed to be loved. But that version of them didn't exist. Maybe it never had. So I let it go. I started making new traditions for myself. I hosted dinners with friends, real friends who didn't make me feel like I had to earn my place. I redecorated my apartment, painting the walls a soft forest green and replacing every piece of furniture that reminded me of home. I joined a writing group, something I'd always wanted to do but never had time for because I was always playing caretaker. And I wrote, pages and pages, not just about my family, but about strength, about silence, about what it means to reclaim your voice when no one ever wanted you to use it in the first place. One afternoon, as I sat in a local cafe editing one of my short stories, a woman approached me. She looked familiar, but it took me a moment to recognize her. It was Elena Clark. She was older than I expected, her dark hair streaked with silver, her eyes sharp but kind. She smiled softly and gestured toward the seat across from me. "May I?" she asked. I nodded, still stunned. "How did you find me?" "I have my ways," she said, almost amused. "And your father gave me your name years ago. I just never thought I'd need to use it." We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of everything between us stretching like glass. Finally, she spoke. "I wanted to thank you. You didn't owe me anything, but you gave me something I thought I'd never have. The truth. And I needed to see that someone in your family had the courage to speak it." "I didn't do it for you," I replied honestly. "I did it for myself. And I respect that," she said. "But it still meant something to me." We talked for almost an hour. She told me about her life, her daughter, how she had always suspected Kyle was my father's child, but was told to stay silent, for everyone's good. She said she hadn't reached out because she didn't want to complicate things for Kyle or me. But when she saw my name on the package, when she read what I had written, she realized it wasn't about avoiding pain anymore. It was about acknowledging it. Before she left, she placed a small envelope on the table. "This is for you," she said. "You don't have to open it. Just keep it." After she was gone, I opened it. Inside was a photo. Me, at maybe 4 years old, in a dress I didn't remember wearing, standing next to a woman I didn't recognize, her, holding my hand, smiling. On the back was a date, written in faded ink, followed by 5 words. "You were never truly alone." I cried for a long time that night, not out of sadness, out of release. Because even if my blood family had failed me, there were people, strangers even, who saw me, who remembered me, who cared. And then, one rainy Thursday afternoon, Kyle showed up at my apartment. I almost didn't open the door, but something in me needed closure. He stood there, soaked from the rain, his face pale and hollow. "I read everything," he said, "and I hated you for it. At first. And now? Now I don't know what to feel." "That's not my responsibility anymore," I replied. "Figure it out." He looked down, then back up, eyes filled with something raw. "I don't know who I am, Bree. Not really. But I know I don't want to be who they raised me to be." I didn't respond. I just let him speak. "I treated you like crap. I let them turn you into the scapegoat. And I wish I could take it back." "You can't," I said. "But you can be different moving forward." He nodded slowly. "Do you think, one day, we could start over?" I looked at him for a long moment. "Maybe. But not today." He accepted that. For once, he didn't argue. He just left, quietly, the same way he came. And for the first time in my life, I realized I didn't need their approval, their apologies, or their explanations to be whole. I had rebuilt myself, not from what they gave me, but from everything they denied me. And that made my foundation unshakable. I knew the storm wasn't over. Even though I had found clarity, even though I had begun building a life outside the ruins of my old one, something inside me still felt unfinished. It wasn't about revenge in the Hollywood sense. No shouting matches or dramatic confrontations. It was more personal, more precise. What I wanted wasn't for them to suffer, but for them to finally look in the mirror and see what they had become. I wanted truth to be the light they couldn't hide from. Weeks passed after Kyle's visit. The silence from my parents was absolute. I imagined them retreating into the safety of denial, telling themselves they had done what they had to do, that I had gone too far. that the problem had always been me. And in some ways, I was grateful for the silence. It meant I didn't have to carry the weight of more false apologies. But I also knew that if I left things like this, the cycle would continue. They'd move on, reconstruct their perfect image, find new ways to bury the truth. So I made one final decision. It began with a letter, not to them, but to the people they had always tried to impress, their community, their friends, their church, their colleagues, people who had seen only the curated version of our family. I didn't write it with bitterness. I wrote it with precision. I detailed my upbringing, the favoritism, the manipulation, the cover-up of Kyle's real parentage. I included the financial records and the test results. I attached copies of the letters I had sent. I signed it with my full name. Then I sent it anonymously to the local newspaper's op-ed column and posted it on a community forum where my parents were active. I didn't include accusations. I included facts. I told my story not as a daughter seeking pity, but as a woman who had been silenced for too long. The post exploded. In a matter of hours, it was being shared and commented on by neighbors, former teachers, co-workers. Some people defended my parents, calling it a private family matter, but others began sharing their own observations. People who had seen my mother's coldness. Teachers who remembered how I was always left to walk home while Kyle was picked up in a shiny SUV. Old friends who had watched me quietly disappear from gatherings while Kyle remained at the center of everything. Truth has a way of spreading when it's real. And this time, I didn't have to say another word. 3 days later, my mother showed up at my apartment. She didn't call. She didn't text. She just appeared, standing outside my door like a shadow I thought I'd already outrun. I watched her through the peephole for a long time before opening it. She looked different. Not fragile, but undone. Her hair wasn't styled. Her makeup was gone. Her coat was buttoned unevenly. She didn't say anything for several seconds. Then finally, she whispered, "How could you do this to us?" Her words didn't sting the way they once would have. They rolled off me like water on stone. "I didn't do anything to you," I said. "I just stopped covering for you." She opened her mouth, then closed it. She stepped inside without asking, like she had a right to be there. I let her. I wanted to hear whatever performance she'd rehearsed. But when she turned to face me, there were no theatrics, just something close to fear. "We're ruined," she said. "Your father hasn't gone to work in a week. Kyle won't return our calls. Everyone is talking." I crossed my arms. "Good. Maybe now you'll understand what silence feels like." She shook her head, as if trying to erase the truth from her ears. "This wasn't necessary. You could have come to us. We could have worked this out privately." "We tried that," I said. "I tried for years. You banished me. You erased me. You protected a lie, and when I asked for answers, you shut me out. You wanted peace, but only if I stayed quiet. That's not peace. That's control." Her eyes welled with tears, but I felt no urge to comfort her. "We were trying to protect Kyle," she said softly. "No," I said, my voice calm. "You were trying to protect yourselves. From embarrassment, from judgment, from the truth, and you were willing to sacrifice your daughter to do it." She took a step back like I'd hit her. "You think I don't know what I've lost?" she asked. "You think I don't feel it?" "I don't know," I replied, "because you never showed me." She sat down slowly on the edge of my couch, like her legs couldn't hold her anymore. "You were always so strong, so independent. I thought you didn't need as much." "That's not love," I said. "That's favoritism dressed up as logic." We sat in silence for a long time, the kind of silence that stretches across decades, filled with things unsaid. "I don't expect you to forgive me," she finally said. "I don't know if I ever will," I replied honestly. "But that's not what this is about." "Then what is it about?" she asked. "Dignity," I said. "Mine. Yours if you want to find it again. The kind that only comes from honesty." She wiped her face, stood up, and walked to the door. Before she left, she looked back at me. "Your father wants to see you." "I'm not ready." She nodded. "When you are, he'll be waiting." And just like that, she was gone. That night, I sat with everything. The destruction, The revelations, the confrontation, and I didn't feel broken. I felt steady, like I had walked through fire and hadn't been consumed by it. I wasn't interested in rebuilding what had been. I was interested in building something new, with people who saw me, who heard me, who never asked me to shrink so they could shine. I wrote in my journal, the final sentence of the entry standing alone on the page. I am no longer afraid of being the villain in someone else's story, if it means being the hero in my own. And for the first time in my life, I slept without waking up in the middle of the night, waiting for permission to breathe. It's strange how, after everything collapses, the world continues to move forward like nothing happened. People still go to work, coffee shops still open at 7, the mail still arrives. And yet inside you, everything is different. Every step you take feels like it belongs to someone new. That's how I felt in the weeks following my mother's visit. The city hadn't changed, but I had. I no longer carried their expectations like a weighted coat on my shoulders. I walked lighter. Not because I was over it, but because I had finally stopped dragging the past behind me. There was something deeply liberating about not needing closure from people who never gave me honesty. I used to think healing would come with an apology, a family dinner where truths were laid bare, and tears mended broken bonds. But I was wrong. Healing came in quiet, in solitude, in choosing myself over and over again. It came when I realized that I didn't need them to validate what I had lived. My story was real whether they accepted it or not. Still, there were moments when the loneliness crept in. Even after everything they'd done, I missed the illusion of having a family. I missed having someone to call when my car made a strange noise, someone to spend holidays with, someone to text when I found an old recipe from my grandmother. But that longing wasn't for them. It was for what they were supposed to be. And that distinction made all the difference. I poured myself into the life I was building. I published my first personal essay through a small online magazine. It was about silence and how women are taught to hold their pain in tightly sealed jars. The response was overwhelming. Dozens of messages from strangers, mostly women, thanking me for putting into words what they had never been able to say. Their stories mirrored mine in unexpected ways. Some had families who ignored them. Others had been scapegoated, silenced, abandoned. The details differed, but the feeling was always the same, being unloved in places that should have been safe. I realized then that I wasn't alone. I never had been. And that realization filled the hollow parts of me with something stronger than love. It filled them with purpose. One afternoon, while organizing my writing notes, I received a voicemail from Kyle. His voice sounded different, quieter, humbler. "Hey, Bree," he said. "I know you probably don't want to hear from me, and I get it, but I wanted to say thank you for telling the truth, even when it hurt. I've been seeing a therapist, and I've been trying to figure out who I am without all the lies. I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted you to know that. I see it now. What they did, what I did, and I'm sorry. Not because I want things to go back to how they were, but because I want to be better than I was. Take care." I replayed the message twice, then deleted it. Not because I didn't believe him, but because I didn't need it to define my progress. I wished him well silently, then moved on. Forgiveness, I had learned, doesn't always require reconciliation. Sometimes, it just means letting the weight go so it doesn't poison what comes next. My father didn't reach out again. Part of me wondered if he was ashamed, or maybe he just didn't know how to begin. That was the thing about people who build their lives on appearances. They don't know what to do once the mask falls. And by now, I had accepted that some masks were never meant to be lifted again. It was nearing fall when I made one last decision that felt like closing a chapter properly. I returned to the house I grew up in, not to confront anyone, not to reclaim anything, but to see it with clear eyes. It was early evening. The sun had dipped low, casting long shadows across the front lawn. I parked a few houses down and walked slowly, each step echoing with memories. The house looked the same from the outside, same white shutters, same blue door, same flower beds my mother used to tend with obsessive care. But something about it felt smaller now, less powerful. I stood across the street and watched for a while. No one came out, no one saw me, and that was okay. In my hand, I held a letter, not addressed to them, just written for myself. A goodbye. I crossed the street, stepped up to the mailbox, and slid the envelope inside. Not to be read, not to be answered, but to be released. Then I turned around and walked away without looking back. As I drove home, a soft rain began to fall, tapping against the windshield in a rhythm that felt like closure. I thought about the girl I used to be, the one who stayed silent to keep the peace, who smiled while her heart broke, who thought being good meant being quiet. I wanted to reach back through time and hug her, tell her she wasn't wrong for wanting love, tell her that one day she'd give herself the love they never could. That night, I wrote one last entry in my journal before closing it for good. Today, I stood at the edge of my past and didn't flinch. I told the truth. I set myself free. And I finally understand that the most radical thing a woman can do is stop apologizing for her own clarity. I am not a daughter undone. I am a woman reborn. As I turned out the light and laid my head on the pillow, I smiled. Not because everything had been fixed, but because I had finally stopped waiting for someone else to save me. 2 years later, I barely recognized the woman I had once been. Not because she was a stranger, but because I could finally see how much weight she carried. Back then, I thought strength meant holding everything together. I thought endurance meant staying quiet. But strength, I've learned, often looks like letting go. It looks like rebuilding without bitterness. It looks like choosing yourself even when the people who raised you won't. A lot had changed since that summer. I had moved into a small townhouse on the edge of the city, surrounded by trees and silence I had chosen. I found joy in the little things. Fresh coffee in the morning, the way the light hit my window at sunset, the sound of my own laughter filling a space I made mine. I'd never had that before. A place that wasn't shaped by anyone's expectations but mine. A place where I could finally just exist. Writing had become more than a healing tool. It became a way of life. My essays found homes in blogs, literary magazines, even podcasts. I started hosting workshops for women who wanted to tell their stories but didn't know how to begin. We'd sit in circles, sometimes in cafes, sometimes over Zoom, and share the things we were never allowed to say out loud. And each time, I saw the same look in their eyes I once had in mine, that fragile blend of fear and hope. I told them what I had to learn the hard way, that telling the truth won't always earn applause, but it will set you free. Sometimes after workshops, I'd receive quiet messages from women who hadn't spoken during the session. Messages like, "I've never said this to anyone before," or, "Your story gave me the courage to leave," or, "I thought I was the only one." I carried those messages like tiny seeds of purpose, not because I needed to be a savior, but because I understood what it felt like to suffer in silence. Kyle and I exchanged one message during those years, a brief email on my birthday. He didn't say much, just that he was thinking of me, that he hoped I was well, that he was still working on himself. I replied politely, and that was it. We didn't try to force a relationship. We simply acknowledged each other's existence in a peaceful kind of silence. Maybe one day there'd be more, or maybe not. But either way, it was enough. As for my parents, they faded from my life like a chapter you stop rereading. Occasionally, I'd hear things through old neighbors or mutual acquaintances. My father had retired early. My mother had taken up gardening again. I wondered if they ever talked about me, if they ever opened that letter I left in their mailbox and read the words I had written for myself. Maybe they did. Maybe they didn't. But I no longer needed to know. One afternoon, while browsing through a bookstore, I stumbled across a book that caught my attention. The cover was soft gray, the title handwritten, "The Women Who Broke the Silence." I picked it up, curious, and flipped to the first page. There, in the opening essay, was my name, my words. An editor from one of the literary magazines had compiled a collection of first-person narratives about family estrangement, generational trauma, and emotional resilience. She had reached out months ago to ask permission, and I'd agreed, not thinking much of it. But holding it in my hands, seeing it there among other voices, I felt a swell of pride I hadn't known I still needed. That night, I lit a candle and placed the book on my nightstand like a symbol, not of pain, but of survival, of rebirth. I had become the woman my younger self used to dream about, the kind who chose peace without asking for permission, the kind who didn't apologize for being hard to swallow. A few months later, I received an unexpected invitation. A university in Washington had heard about my workshops and wanted me to speak at a panel about narrative therapy and emotional healing. I was stunned. I had always been the girl no one listened to. And now, people were inviting me to speak, not because they pitied me, but because they respected my voice. I said yes, without hesitation. The day of the panel, I stood in a small auditorium in front of a group of students, professors, and mental health professionals. My hands trembled slightly as I gripped the microphone, but my voice was steady. "I'm not a therapist," I began. "I'm not a scholar. I'm just a woman who told the truth. And that truth cost me people I loved, but it gave me something far more precious: myself." I told them about the party I wasn't invited to, about the letter, about the silence that followed. I told them about rebuilding, about grief, about how healing is not a destination, but a decision you have to make every single day. And when I finished, they clapped. Not because my story was perfect, but because it was real. Later, as I walked through the campus alone, I thought of all the girls who had been raised to stay quiet. I thought of my younger self, curled up in bed, wondering what she had done wrong. And I whispered into the wind, "You did nothing wrong. You just saw too much." That evening, back home, I sat at my desk and wrote a letter I never planned to send. "Dear Brianna, I'm proud of you. Not because you were brave, but because you were honest. You walked through fire and didn't let it turn you to ash. You asked for love and received silence. And still, you chose compassion. You stopped chasing people who only loved the version of you that made them comfortable. And in doing so, you found the one person who never left your side: yourself. Whatever comes next, you'll be ready, because you finally understand that being uninvited to the party was the beginning, not the end. Love, the woman you became." I folded the letter and tucked it into the back of my journal. Outside, the wind rustled the leaves. The world kept moving, and so did I. I didn't need a happy ending. I needed a true one, and I had written it myself. Have you ever been pushed out of your own family's story simply for telling the truth? If so, you're not alone. Share your experience in the comments. I'd love to hear how you found your strength. If this story touched you, please like and subscribe for more powerful journeys of reclaiming identity and finding peace. Maybe you know someone who's felt silenced. Send this to them. Sometimes, being uninvited is the start of becoming who you were always meant to be. Thank you for listening, and always remember, your voice matters, and you never have to apologize for using it.